Is a new government the answer to Kenya's problems? In the face of growing public discontent, the president has sacked his cabinet. The country has been rocked by protests for weeks. What will it take to tackle Kenya's economic and financial woes? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Kenyan President William Ruto has hit the reset button on his government, dismissing almost his entire cabinet in a surprise shakeup. The decision comes on the heels of nationwide protests against a finance bill that would have led to tax increases. Under increasing public pressure, Ruto withdrew the proposed legislation. But demonstrators demanded accountability for the police killing of dozens of young people and an end to government corruption. While announcing the mass dismissal, President Ruto pledged to build a broad-based government and engage directly with his critics. But will it be enough to quell the anger of a nation? We'll delve deeper into these issues shortly, but first, this report by Axel Zaimovic.
After weeks of mass demonstrations and growing public anger, Kenyan President William Ruto has sacked most of his cabinet.
I have today decided to dismiss with immediate effect all the cabinet secretaries and attorney general of the Republic of Kenya, of the Cabinet of Kenya, except the Prime Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs.
The grassroots movement led by young people began peacefully. Tens of thousands marched against the finance bill that would have raised taxes. But when MPs passed the bill, the demonstrations turned violent. Protesters stormed the parliament complex, setting fire to one of the buildings. Police, who would later be accused of brutality, used live ammunition on the crowds, killing dozens of people. A day later, President Ruto withdrew the bill. But the demonstrations didn't end, and the demands changed to calls for an end to government corruption. The cabinet shakeup is Ruto's response.
I will immediately engage in extensive consultations across different sectors and political formations and other Kenyans, both in public and private, with the aim of setting up a broad-based government.
Some Kenyans have welcomed the move. Others say the problems run deeper.
The president must ensure that there is vigorous vetting for these individuals. These should not be politicians, these should not be his friends, these should be technocrats, people from professions.
All those killer cops that killed people, we want them all to go home. We want the president to address the issues of all those people who are killed, the families.
I, William Samoei Ruto.
Ruto came to power 2 years ago, promising to help ordinary Kenyans. Instead, he and his government are facing accusations of corruption and economic mismanagement. The president maintained the finance bill was necessary to reduce public debt, which currently stands at $78 billion. He hoped to pay off $2.7 billion by raising taxes and introducing levies on essential items. Now he's proposing a budget cut of $1.2 billion. Ruto faces a difficult balancing act, satisfying international lenders by introducing austerity measures, while addressing concerns at home, where millions are struggling to make ends meet. The question now is whether the president can win back Kenyan support with a new government and a new budget. Axel Zaimovic, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. They're all joining us from Nairobi. Silvanus Osoro is a member of the Kenyan Parliament representing the governing party. He voted in favor of that finance bill. Wanjiru Gikonyo is a researcher on good governance and accountability. She's also the former coordinator for a civil society campaign that highlighted the impact of public debt on the economy. And finally, Kiritu Chege is an activist and member of the Communist Party of Kenya. He took part in some of last month's protests. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Kiritu, let me start with you today. Is sacking most of the cabinet, as President Ruto has done, the answer to Kenya's problems right now? You protested. You were out in the streets with other protesters, other activists. Does this action by the president say to you that he is listening to the demands of the protesters?
No, it does not. Let me actually address how Ruto has decided to go about this. He said that he's going to build a cabinet that's based on a broad coalition. What he's actually talked about is the fact that he's going to bring in the opposition leader Raila Odinga and the Azimio coalition. It's probable that he's going to form the next cabinet on the basis of a coalition with those people. That means that we're going to go back to a situation that we had a while back in Kenya, similar to a situation that we had a while back in Kenya called Musumkate, and that did not work out well for Kenyans back in that is back in 2008. I do not think it is enough. I think it has been made very clear by the protesters what we want. We want Ruto to go. The current hashtag, and for everyone who's listening, is hashtag Ruto must go. We have currently on the panel an MP who currently voted yes. I would just like to tell him, shame on you. Right? I would just like to say that the finance bill is not something that dropping it is something that we can say that him dropping it is showing that he listened. Because in several interviews that he has done, he has made it very clear that he dropped it unwillingly and that he is proud of the bill that he's passed. He has actually said that the MPs who voted yes for that bill should be very proud of themselves. They did a great service to this nation. And on top of that, he passed the Appropriations Act. Now, the Appropriations Act is attached to the finance bill. The finance bill actually dictates where the money is coming from. The Appropriations Act is now saying the money that has been collected, how it's going to be distributed. Now, he didn't pass the finance bill he didn't pass it into law, but he passed the appropriations bill and made it into law. So now my question is, in passing the appropriations bill, did he listen to the people at every single point through rhetoric, through law, and through policy? He has demonstrated that he hasn't listened to the people. Ruto must.
Silvanus, you voted for that controversial finance bill that President Ruto ultimately scrapped. Do you think that he was wrong to abandon it?
Extremely wrong. And not only did I vote yes, I also mobilized my colleagues as the chief whip of the National Assembly of the majority to vote yes. We must be realistic. We have a country that passed a constitution in 2010 which is humongous, that we must maintain. It is the Kenyan people that passed to have 47 counties across the country, that they got to pay their staff. It is the Kenyan people that set different systems of government that are autonomous, including the judiciary. It is the Kenyan people that gave the responsibility of the previous government to pass and approve the new system of education called CBC that requires an additional 66,000 teachers to teach their students in schools. That ideally required a budget. It required extra money. The only way government makes money is through taxes. And we had to broaden, the president had to find a way to broaden the tax base. That was one option. He had the option of broadening the tax base or borrowing. What my colleague in this panel is saying and telling me, shame on you, I'll tell him also, it is also shameful for a country to be dependent on foreign aid to run their internal affairs. That is what a responsible leader ought to have done. Extend the tax base, and that is what we did on all the imports in several several items that are imported from different countries. That is what we did. Just an additional taxes on the finished products, not locally manufactured products. And then we even gave, we also, in that very bill, there was a proposal to zero rate taxes on raw materials for those finished products so that you can be able to get those companies set base in industrial area and employ our young people. So people, coming on and raising issues on Ruto must go, there are constitutional ways of sending away the president, and that can only happen in the ballot. All these hashtags and street riots and everything will not have the president go. It will only happen when we go to the ballot. So we proudly voted yes. Even if the bill came today, I'll still vote yes because I know the situation the country is. We had a 4 trillion budget. How do you finance that budget? How do you recruit the teachers?
Silvanus,
The
sorry
parents know
to
their students are understaffed.
Silvanus, I'm going to get back to you about some of the points you're making in just a minute. Kiritu, I know you want to jump in, but I want to go to Wanjiru right now. Ruto has dismissed most of the cabinet. That is the headline here, but I want to dig a little deeper. I mean, how is this being seen by the public? Is this seen as though there is actually going to be a new government in place, or is this being seen as just the removal of a few officials? And if these officials are removed, who is now in charge of these government portfolios?
Well, thank you so much, Mohammed, and it's good to be here to add my voice onto this. Yes, Ruto has dismissed the entire cabinet, but of course, the lack of legitimacy of the government stems from his management of the economy and his management of the public service. He's been a very hands-on president who's really weakened and compromised, politicians such as Osoro, much as he's making a very spirited argument. There are so many gaps in the narrative that he's sharing here today. So much as and I would say he's an outgoing president because he's lost the trust and confidence of the majority of Kenyans, much as William Ruto has now dissolved this cabinet and is planning to put up another one. You have to remember that the problem with the cabinet stems from the appointments he made. He appointed people who had cases, corruption cases, murder cases, rape cases in front of the court of law. And he then used his mechanisms to have those cases withdrawn through the DPP. He then took this DPP, appointed him to a much higher position, and then appointed these people. So actually, the highest chances of getting into Ruto's cabinet was to have some charges before the court, stealing public money, all kinds of criminal activity. Then the other thing is competence. Some of the people he appointed are politicians, and they could be good enough at their politics, but can they run government? So William Ruto appointed a cabinet that inspired no confidence and couldn't perform. He then proceeded to have economic policies that actually have been he reneged on his manifesto promises because it was supposed to be a bottom-up government to assist business, to assist small businesses, to put money in the pockets of Kenyans. And he's done exactly the opposite because he got in, he took up the IMF.
Wanjiru, I'm sorry to interrupt, but may I just ask you, because you're making the point about economic policies. Just very quickly, I want to ask you, there is this cost of living crisis in Kenya. The economic conditions are worsening. What is it going to take to tackle Kenya's financial woes?
There's a need to cut down on wasteful spending. There's a lot of duplication in the budget. There's a lot of excessive spending through allowances, through administrative costs, unnecessary travel. Civil society organizations are presently combing through the budget, and they are confident they can find $1 trillion shillings, which is about possibly 8 billion USD of waste. Another thing that happens, much as Osoro is saying that we enacted a very expensive constitution, the national government wage bill has continued to increase as they implement the constitution. It was supposed to decrease as those functions and officers are decentralized to the local level. There's been overemployment, there's been a lot of waste, there's also been corruption. The Auditor General can't account for almost another 8 billion USD in terms of borrowed money. So the accountability option and what the Gen Z protest and really revolt is about, it's about accountability. It's about the culture of government. It's about the kind of leaders. It's about respecting the public by listening to public participation and using sound evidence, because the argument that you increase taxes to get more revenue doesn't hold water. The data of the Parliamentary Budget Office shows that the growth in taxes has actually been, taxes have been decreasing because there's of overtaxation. Rather, there's a need to cut the expenditure, and then put the expenditure, instead of funding political projects that are, benefiting a few, put the money where it has incremental value. And that is what Parliament has completely missed and misrepresented Kenyans.
Kiritu, I see you reacting to what Wanjiru was saying, and also you were reacting earlier to what Silvanus was saying. Look, I want to also ask you about the fact that, youth dissatisfaction with Ruto, that began before these proposed tax hikes, right? I mean, what else were the protesters who came out in the streets upset about prior to this latest bill that was eventually withdrawn?
There are so many things we could talk about, but first, let me just highlight the one law that is really egregious. There is the seed law, or the punitive seed law, that they want to pass, that they have been pushing for in Parliament. Basically, there is this thing called seed sharing. Seed sharing is a situation where farmers can exchange with each other seeds that they can now use to plant crops and stuff, rather than like getting generic seeds that they can buy from from government or from companies like Monsanto. So that was criminalized, or is in the process of being criminalized by Parliament, which means then that farmers are going to be directly dependent on government parastatals that are being privatized and sold to companies like Monsanto, so that they can actually get seeds to plant their crops. There are so many other laws or punitive measures that the government is taking on top of things like this. With this current financial year, we've had laws, for example, like the Land Amendment Bill, or the Land Amendment Law. I'm pretty sure Osoro is going to come in and say, oh, misinformed or something like that. But we do know that there were active efforts by the government to actually turn freehold land in Kenya and convert it into leasehold land, which would essentially mean that, with leasehold land, even any foreigner can actually come in and buy land in Kenya, as opposed to freehold land, which is exclusively accessed by Kenyan citizens. We are being pushed into another situation of colonialism. But let me just say on top of this, MP Mr. Osoro, we were told by a Kuru court that you guys had received 2 million shillings each as MPs to actually vote yes for this finance bill. George Koimburi, a current MP and my MP of Juja, actually came in and confirmed this in front of the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, that MPs had actually been bribed to actually take in this 2 million shillings. So we know full well that there are so many reasons why you're proud of voting yes for this bill, but servicing the people is not one of them. Serving Ruto, serving the masters of IMF, that is definitely a good reason why.
Silvanus, President Ruto has said that he'll set up a broad-based government. Many have taken this to mean that perhaps he is suggesting that he will attempt to bring the opposition into some form of unity government going forward. Do you think we could see that happen?
It is only the president that has got a vision for the government that he wants to make. And the definitions of Broadway government or broad-based government can only be defined by him and through, his advisors and those people that sit around him. And it's just guesswork when people say he wants to bring in Raila Odinga, he wants to bring in the opposition leaders. All that is guesswork. I mean, broad-based government is an English term. So ideally, it may mean regional balance, it may mean expertise, balancing and such. But I do not want to go without responding to allegations that are made towards the members of parliament on the payment of bribe of 2 million shillings. I mean, really, people are allowed to protest, but they should also respect the rights of others. Each member of parliament has his own brain. And by the way, if one becomes a member of parliament, besides being a member of parliament, we have professions. I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. This character of demonizing politicians, that calling them names, and when you form a cabinet, you need not to have politicians. Before a cabinet, there are cabinet ministers or cabinet secretaries who are professionals. Professor Kindiki is a professional and a professor in law. Even before joining politics, he was practicing. I mean, he's a professional. Politics is not demonic in any case. the President of the Republic of Kenya is a politician himself, unless you want to appoint a sheikh or a pastor to be the head of state and only practice that in that line. But even as I say that, we have to ask ourselves pertinent questions. We have a country to run. We have a system to run that we've been given by Kenyans. That in every proposal we raise, every governing proposal that is raised, everybody has an opinion. You have an opinion on who should be appointed. You have an opinion on who should serve in parliament. You even have an opinion on who should exit. That opinion can only be exercised through the ballot. And once you sign a social contract with your people upon elections, the people give you that right to represent them. And that is what members of parliament do under Article 95. I represent the people of South Mogrango in a contract, within 5 years of my contract of serving. And any decision I make midway, right or wrong, can either be corrected through collection of signatures for my recall, or people wait until 2027 and have me out. You don't do that through insulting the leaders. You don't do that through allegations, unsubstantiated allegations of bribery. You don't do that through attacking constitutional institutions. I mean, you can't claim on one side that you want to protect the government or the constitution of Kenya, but on the other side, you are killing the institutions that have been set by the very same constitution.
Silvanus,
let people stop being.
Silvanus, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're just starting to run out of time, and I want to get back to Wanjiru because I want to ask you about the fact that President Ruto, he's facing a population that's struggling due to the cost of living, which we were talking about earlier. But he's also facing demands of lenders like the International Monetary Fund, which wants to see him cut deficits. So how does he thread this needle? I mean, how do you go about trying to fix this problem?
That is exactly the question all of us should be asking.
Silvanus, sorry, I was asking Wanjiru.
Parliaments are used to occupying space and they do not have they forget that they are bound by the national values under the Constitution. Not only citizens are. And the first of the articles of the Constitution is we are the people, and the power delegated to them is delegated by the people of Kenya, and the people of Kenya can take back that power. And that is what Gen Z has done, because our members of parliament do not listen to the professional advice of the Auditor General, do not listen to the professional advice of the Parliamentary Budget Office that told them they have overestimated the revenue targets that inform the budget in the first place. They do not listen to anybody. They don't listen to business that say they are struggling because they are overtaxed. And then they come and talk really disrespectfully. They have been called the largest auction house in Africa by fellow MPs. And if you speak to fellow MPs of integrity, they'll tell you brown envelope culture is rife in the House of Parliament. Yes, Kindiki is a professional, but he has sold out his professional ethics because he has overseen the murder of at least 43 of our Gen Z youth who are protesting against the cost of living. How immoral is that? This government has lost the right to rule Kenyans. And maybe on the issue of the IMF has conditionalities that it has put in place. Unfortunately, William Ruto has been unable to balance the demands of the IMF and the needs of Kenyans. And what he needed to have done is, one, clean up the rot, because there is a lot that is in the debt register that was procured through corruption that is not serving Kenyans. So he needed to stand up against the IMF. The other thing is the international global system works against countries such as Kenya. And there is a move now actually for debt cancellation, because some of that debt has been procured on speculative basis behind closed doors and contrary to the constitutions of those countries. And there's a ruling from Mozambique on the tuna bonds that actually ruled in favor of the people. So there is a move to actually have debt cancellation, because we are looking at a neoliberal, neo-colonial structure that is not working for countries in Africa. And when you have governments and parliaments, like we are hearing our fellow Kenyan here speaking, that can't look after public interest, and the public lose because their leaders don't do the right thing, and because the due diligence by the lenders is also not done. So why should Kenyans bear the brunt of that? So the people's movement has said no to this, and they are demanding a change. Beyond the firing the cabinet, there are fundamental changes that are needed on the table, including removal of members of parliament who shouldn't have been on the ballot, because the IEBC and
Wanjiru,
the EACC...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're just starting to run out of time, and I see that Kiritu wants to interject here. Kiritu, we only have a couple of minutes left. It looks like you want to add to the discussion, but I also want to ask you about this particular fact. Ruto has said that he seeks to engage with the protesters going forward. It's been reported that there was an event on X, the social media platform, last week in which he was engaging with young Kenyans. Do you see these efforts as being authentic, as being genuine? Do you think he is going to be engaging with members of your generation, with protesters going forward?
First of all, the person who hosted that space, Osama Otero, has already been sidelined on social media. He's been ostracized and thrown out of the movement precisely because he did that space with Ruto that gave Ruto what he had been seeking for, with all of these protests having gone on. That is a little bit of legitimacy. This guy was interviewed by a journalist. His name is Linus Kaikai. You probably had followed up on that. There is, within the interview, he was asked by Linus Kaikai, one of the three journalists. He was asked, "Do you know of the child who was killed in Rungai?" His name is I'm forgetting the name of the child. But he was asked point blank, "Did you follow up on who killed that child?" But then he said, "The child is alive, isn't he?" And he said it with such callousness that makes you wonder, is this somebody that you can argue with? And then he went on to now say that a protester took the gun from police officers and then shot that child. And then went on to even say, no, actually, that child wasn't killed during these protests. That child was killed like 2 years ago. And this is just facts that are being brought. How can you argue with somebody who constantly tries to gaslight?
I'm sorry to interrupt. But we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there today. We've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. But thank you all for joining us. Thanks to all of our guests: Silvanus Osoro, Wanjiru Gikonyo, and Kiritu Chege. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.